Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Putnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European and Canadian channels, African, Asian channels and all news agencies have reported the same news. Now the news in detail. A container ship collided with Baltimore Bridge. Search for survivors is continued. Authorities are still looking for answers. Access to milfristone abortion tablet will be decided by Supreme Court. Big differences between defense ministers of American and Israeli on Gaza. Russia continues to blame Ukraine for the Moscow terrorist attack. Wall Street reporter in Russian prison. British court stopped extradition of Julius Assange. Venezuelan opposition leader barred from election. A gag order for Trump by court. Kennedy announces vice president for election. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industrial, Nasdaq and S&P 500 all went down. French president in Brazil.
A Baltimore bridge collapses after being struck by a container ship. The search for survivors and for answers. Reproductive rights are back before the Supreme Court. At stake, access to a commonly used abortion pill. And Israel's defense minister meets his American counterpart in Washington as the two nations are increasingly at odds over the war in Gaza.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
These are people who are trying to change the world. Startups have this energy that energizes me. I'm thriving by helping others every day. People who know BDO.
On an American Cruise Line's journey, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Search and rescue efforts are underway in Baltimore after a major commuter bridge collapsed there overnight. Officials say 6 people remain unaccounted for.
In the middle of the night, a container ship slowly trying to exit Baltimore's outer harbor rams into a support beam of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. And all at once, the towering 1.6-mile-long structure plummets into the river below.
Never would you think that you would physically see the Key Bridge tumble down like that. It looked like something out of an action movie.
By sunrise, the scope of the disaster came into full view. The on-ramp severed, the cargo ship buried beneath the bridge's mangled truss. Investigators are still seeking answers to what happened. Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
I know this has been a long night. We started coordinating immediately after the Key Bridge collapsed. The preliminary investigation points to an accident. We haven't seen any credible evidence of a terrorist attack.
A few minutes before impact, the ship's lights went out. Operators put out a mayday that the vessel had lost power, giving police time to divert traffic from the bridge before the collision.
Many of the vehicles were stopped before they got onto the bridge, which saved lives in a very, very heroic way.
Still, sonars detected several cars in the water, and authorities say a crew had been repairing potholes on the bridge when it collapsed. Maryland Secretary of Transportation said a massive search and rescue is underway.
We're basically searching for everyone that was potentially on the bridge. As you can imagine, it's the middle of the night. You know what type of traffic was there, how many workers were there.
President Biden said today that he intends to have the federal government pay to rebuild the bridge.
It's going to take some time. The people of Baltimore can count on us, though, to stick with them at every step of the way.
The Key Bridge was one of 3 interstate crossings of the Patapsco River, which is a tributary of the Chesapeake. The remaining 2 are both lower clearance tunnels. The wreck has already snarled commuter traffic, as well as shipping traffic in and out of Baltimore. But experts say other harbors along the East Coast can handle the pressure.
Baltimore is not one of the bigger container ports in the region.
Emily Stausbohl is an analyst at Zanetta, an international shipping analytics platform.
The ports of New York, New Jersey, and Virginia are much bigger, and and also have at the moment have capacity to be able to manage diverted volumes from Baltimore. If you combine those three ports in 2023, about 10% of containers were handled in Baltimore.
For now, the harbor is dotted with remnants of a bridge used by 30,000 drivers daily, with no timeline on when it will be operational again.
I'm Vanessa Ruiz in for Stephanie Tsai with NewsHour West. Updating our top story. This evening, the U.S. Coast Guard said the 6 people missing in the Baltimore bridge collapse are presumed dead. The search and rescue mission will transition to a recovery effort. Russian officials insisted again that Ukraine played a role in Friday's concert hall attack outside Moscow. A branch of the Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for killing 139 people there. But as workers spend another day clearing debris, the head of Russia's top security agency accused Kyiv and its allies.
We believe that the action was prepared by the Islamist radicals and facilitated by Western special services. As for the Ukrainian intelligence services, I think they're directly involved too.
The Russians have not presented evidence to support their claim. A Moscow court has extended the detention of American Evan Gershkovich again, this time through June. The Wall Street Journal reporter already spent a year behind bars accused of espionage. After he appeared in court today, the U.S. ambassador to Russia again rejected the charges and said the case is purely political.
As we cross the one-year mark, the Russian government has yet to present any evidence to substantiate its accusations. Evan's case is not about evidence, due process, or rule of law. It is about using American citizens as pawns to achieve political ends.
Gershkovich and the Journal have denied the espionage allegations. A British court today blocked WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from being extradited to the U.S. for now. The U.S. wants to prosecute Assange for publication of classified American documents back in 2010. The court said the U.S. must guarantee Assange is afforded the same First Amendment protections as a United States citizen and that the death penalty is not imposed. Washington has 3 weeks to give that guarantee or a new appeals process will begin. Back in this country, a state judge in New York imposed a gag order on former President Trump for his hush money trial next month. The judge's ruling said it is without question that the imminency of the risk of harm is now paramount. The gag order bars public statements about witnesses, prosecutors, court staff, and jurors. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced Nicole Shanahan as his running mate today. Shanahan is 38, a lawyer and philanthropist from California, and has never held elected office. But in Oakland, California, Kennedy told supporters that Shanahan met all his requirements for vice president.
I wanted a partner who was a gifted administrator, but also possesses the gift of curiosity, an open, inquiring mind, and the confidence to change even her strongest opinions in the face of contrary evidence.
Kennedy chose a running mate early because some states require it before he applies for ballot access. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton will pay nearly $300,000 to settle a criminal securities fraud case. The high-profile Republican faced trial next month on charges of duping investors in a tech startup. Under today's agreement, Paxton makes restitution and does community service, but keeps his elected position. In a passing of note, the sculptor Richard Serra has died. His monumental works of steel spirals and warped corridors belie their size with intimacy. His art encouraged close-up exploration even if it was inscrutable. The cause of death was pneumonia. Richard Serra was 85. So to come on the NewsHour, a troubled rollout causes more delays for students seeking financial aid. An acclaimed foreign correspondent discusses his memoir and battle with terminal cancer. The changing landscape of podcasts and much more.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
For the first time since Roe v. Wade was overturned 2 years ago, abortion is once again before the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices today heard a case that centers on access to the most widely used abortion pill, mifepristone. Outside, on the steps of the court, protesters marched, chanted, and waved signs. Inside, arguments focused on the FDA's approval of the drug.
Not go along with the majority in that, but I'm not even sure that Justice Thomas would be at his center because he had some very good questions about standing as well. So that's my gut feeling at this point.
Well, we always like to trust your gut. Marsha Coyle, thank you so much as always.
My pleasure.
Today at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin presented an alternative vision to Israel's stated assault plan on the southern Gazan city of Rafah. More than 1 million Gazans have fled their homes and are now sheltering there. Austin and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met today as negotiations over a ceasefire and hostage release seem to hit an impasse. Nick Schifrin is following it all, and he joins me now. Nick, so how did this meeting today between Austin and Gallant go?
As these negotiations continue.
All right, Nick Schifrin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Students waiting on financial aid will now have to wait even longer after the Department of Education just found a calculation error on hundreds of thousands of student aid applications. That means that right as students are trying to decide what school to attend, some have to make that choice not knowing key information about how much aid they're getting. Laura Barone Lopez is here to help us unravel all the details.
That's all on education. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Laura. After decades of covering war, journalist and author Rod Norland was in New Delhi when he was struck by a grand mal seizure and then given a diagnosis of incurable cancer. Nick Schifrin sat down with Norland to talk about facing death and his discovery of a grace and love that he had never felt before.
From Cambodia to Kabul, San Salvador to Sarajevo, Rod Nordland is no stranger to death. He's been a foreign correspondent for more than 40 years, first for the Philadelphia Inquirer, then for Newsweek, and then the New York Times, including as bureau chief in Kabul, where he and I met for the first time. But if Nordland shadowed death for all those years, today death shadows him. He's been diagnosed waiting for the monsoon. Great to see you,
Nick. Thank you very much.
Stay with us for a look at the gambling allegations against the translator for baseball's biggest star. But first, to the world of audio. An estimated 500 million people will listen to podcasts this year. That's the most in the medium's short history. Since the very term podcast was coined 20 years ago, the format has grown into a $25 billion industry. Spotify just revealed that its top-performing podcast...
Joyful.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown at On Air Fest in Brooklyn, New York.
One of the world's premier athletes, Shohei Ohtani, has been caught up in allegations of illegal gambling. The Los Angeles Dodger just signed a record 10-year, $700 million contract, but he's now engulfed in controversy. Here's what we know. Ohtani's former interpreter, Ibe Mizuhara, said he asked Ohtani to pay off millions of dollars.
That suggests that his legal camp feels confident in the evidence they have. We're just going to have to see how it shakes out.
All right, Andy McCullough of The Athletic, thank you so much for helping us wade through all of this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Finally tonight, Brandon Stossy is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Creative Independent. It's an online resource that provides emotional and practical guidance for writers and musicians and artists. Here, he shares his brief but spectacular take on the power of crying in public.
I think people can be disarmed by crying if you're not expecting it. It's a powerful thing. If someone's willing to go to that place in front of you, you react to it. I think very rarely does someone cry and you just have zero emotion. I feel like I cry pretty frequently. I cry during sports. I'm a huge Buffalo Bills fan, and sometimes I'll cry tears of joy. My mother died 13 years ago, so I find sometimes around then I'll cry more. Then my wife points out, oh yeah, you're like nearing the anniversary of your mother's death. So I think sometimes there's those points in the year where you just cry more. The first time I noticed people crying in public was when I was jogging, and I just saw someone running towards me, and there were
videos on our website. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm William Brangham. Thank you so much for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Search and rescue operations are suspended after the Baltimore bridge collapsed. The 6 missing people now presumed dead. Several nations put their weight behind a UN report that concludes Israel is committing acts of genocide. The author tells the UN Human Rights Council it should be hit with an arms embargo and sanctions. Emmanuel Macron embarks on the first state visit to Brazil by a French leader in more than a decade, jointly announcing €1 billion plan to protect the Amazon rainforest. Watching France 24, I'm Alexander Orcott. Now, search and rescue operations have been suspended in Baltimore, where a cargo ship took down a major bridge, blocking one of the busiest harbours in the United States. The Maryland governor said the authorities stopped cars crossing to prevent an even worse disaster, though an 8-strong work crew was still in place. 2 were rescued, but still 6 remain missing and are presumed dead. Lauren Bestecker has more.
18 hours after the crash, hopes of finding the 6 missing workers alive had all but faded. And as the night fell on the Baltimore harbor, the U.S. Coast Guard decided to suspend the search.
Based on the length of time that we've gone in the search, the extensive search efforts that we've put into it, the water temperature, that at this point, we do not believe that we're going to find any of these individuals still alive.
The Coast Guard said the darkened, wreckage-strewn waters made it too dangerous for divers to operate, but vowed searches would resume at first light on Wednesday. Tuesday morning, a massive cargo ship suffered a power failure and crashed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge, bringing down the entire structure. The spectacular collapse left the city of Baltimore in shock and threatened to severely impact shipping in one of the country's busiest ports.
That's our biggest moneymaker in the whole state right there, the portable Baltimore. And now your moneymaker's shut down.
U.S. Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg vowed to rebuild the bridge as soon as possible and echoed a promise made by Biden that the federal government would foot the bill.
The president's plan is to work with everyone here in order to rebuild this bridge and reopen this port. It will not be quick. It will not be inexpensive. But we will rebuild together.
In the meantime, dozens of ships were stranded outside the port of Baltimore as maritime traffic was brought to a standstill.
A UN expert who concluded Israel is committing acts of genocide in the Gaza Strip has received support from several countries. Francesca Albanese's report was backed by mostly Muslim and Arab nations, although some Latin American also joined in. She told the UN Human Rights Council that Israel should be hit with an arms embargo and sanctions.
Detailing the findings of her report on Israel's war in Gaza, the UN Special Rapporteur for Palestine didn't mince her words.
There are reasonable grounds to believe that the threshold indicating the commission of the crime of genocide against Palestinians as a group in Gaza has been met. When genocidal intent is so conspicuous, so ostentatious as it is in Gaza, we cannot avert our eyes.
The UN expert also called for sanctions as well as an arms embargo, and while her findings didn't reflect the official stance of the United Nations, they were likely to deepen the growing schism between the international body and Israel. A day earlier, a Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza sparked the ire of Netanyahu's cabinet and led Israel's defense minister to briefly suspend his trip to Washington. On Tuesday, U.S. officials defended their decision to abstain from the ceasefire vote, but insisted they still stood by Israel.
The path to a ceasefire and the release of hostages is something that will be reached through negotiations between Israel and Hamas, enabled by third-party countries and in which the United States is participating, and not through a UN process, and that remains our belief.
Seemingly undeterred by the mounting international pressure, Israel carried out fresh airstrikes on Rafah on Tuesday, while heavy fighting continued around the Al-Shifa and Al-Nasser hospitals. According to Hamas, more than 32,000 people have been killed since the start of the war in Gaza, most of them women and children.
Almost a year after the discovery of mass graves in southeastern Kenya, the bodies of the victims are being returned to families. Meanwhile, the cult leader, Paul Mackenzie, who allegedly told his followers to starve themselves to death, is to stand trial next month.
Families were overcome with emotion as they recovered the remains of loved ones here in Kenya. The country's government has started handing over the bodies of victims of a doomsday cult after almost a year of work to identify them using DNA. For relatives, it has been a painful wait, one that still isn't over for some.
It has been a very tough journey from last year to now, a very tough one. We lost 8 members. We have just got we were supposed to get 5, but we've been told that one of the children did not match the DNA, so now we've been given only 4.
Between April and October last year, hundreds of bodies were exhumed from mass graves in the Shakahola forest in southeastern Kenya. They were followers of the Good News International Church led by Paul Mackenzie, who is accused of telling followers to starve themselves to death in order to, quote, meet Jesus. As Mackenzie awaits trial, the director of Amnesty International Kenya has urged the government to help victims' families to transport their bodies.
Many of these families come from 400 to 500 kilometers away, so we are calling on the Ministry of Interior and the National Police Service to be able to be facilitated to be able to do this.
Mackenzie is facing murder charges along with 29 others who have all pleaded not guilty. The trial is set to begin on April the 23rd.
And the French and Brazilian presidents have launched an initiative aimed to raise €1 billion in green investment for the Amazon rainforest. The announcement was made as Emmanuel Macron began his state visit. Yanonosko tells us more.
This visit is being seen as particularly significant in Brazil. It's the first visit by a French president for 11 years, and it comes after 4 years of tensions between the two countries, between President Macron and former President Bolsonaro, Lula's predecessor. It's also significant that the first stop on this visit was Belém, a city that's close to the mouth of the river Amazon, and also the city that will host next year's COP30 conference on combating climate change. Both Lula and Macron have made combating climate change a top political priority, and indeed they have pledged to raise €1 billion over the next 4 years to protect biodiversity. Now, despite these warm relations between the two presidents, there are also some points of contention. The first one is the stalled trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur, the equivalent of the European Union here in South America. President Macron is worried about the effect it will have on France's agricultural industry, and he says that French farmers are being held to much higher standards than South American farmers as the particular agreement stands at the moment. The other point of contention is the war in Ukraine. The EU has imposed heavy sanctions on Russia. However, Lula, Brazil, along with the global South generally, has refused to take sides and has refused to impose sanctions. However, it is an issue that President Macron would like to discuss at the upcoming G20 summit to be held later in the year in Rio de Janeiro. Despite those divergences between the two, it's clear that the relationship between them is much warmer than between Macron and Bolsonaro, and it's certainly in Brazil's interest to keep those relationships close. After all, France is the third biggest investor in Brazil, to the tune of around €35 billion, a figure that Lula no doubt would like to see increase.
France is to give the Ukrainian firepower a boost by delivering 78 Caesar howitzers, along with tens of thousands more artillery shells. The announcement came from the French Defense Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, who said he's willing to requisition industrial capacity to speed up the production of weapons needed by Kiev.
It's a move which could help Ukraine in its grueling counter-offensive against Russia. On Tuesday, the French Defense Minister said he may requisition stocks, staff, or facilities to hasten production of weapons needed by Kiev and elsewhere.
For the first time, I am not ruling out using what the law allows ministers to do, i.e., if things are not on track in terms of production rates and lead times, to make requisitions, if necessary, or to use the right of prioritization.
Lecornu cited Aster missiles, which have been used in Ukraine's air defense, as a possible example for such a move. It comes after France, Germany, and Poland pledged to boost production of military equipment and procure more weapons for Kiev earlier this month. Meanwhile, US efforts to vote through a fresh military aid package for Ukraine, worth $60 billion, have so far failed. As the conflict enters its third year, Ukraine is outnumbered by Moscow's troops on the ground and is running out of ammunition to resist its Russian invaders. Kiev's troops, who are growing increasingly exhausted, faced a setback when the eastern city of Avdiivka was taken by Russia last month.
Now, Russian officials are maintaining accusations that Ukraine and the West had a role in last week's Moscow concert hall attack, despite denials of involvement by Kiev and a claim of responsibility by an affiliate of the Islamic State group. Moscow is still reeling from the mass shooting, in which 139 people were killed and some 90 were hospitalized.
Echoing the president's recent claims, the head of Russia's intelligence service accused Ukraine, along with the US and the UK, of involvement in the deadly attack on the Crocus City Hall outside Moscow, without offering evidence.
We believe that the action was prepared by both the Islamist radicals themselves and was facilitated by Western special services. As for the Ukrainian intelligence services, they are directly involved.
On Sunday, 4 Tajik men accused of carrying out the attack appeared before a Moscow court on terrorism charges, showing signs of severe beatings. Russian President Vladimir Putin said the men were arrested while trying to escape to Ukraine. This assertion was undermined by the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who said the suspects headed for Ukraine because they feared tight controls on the Belarus border. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the mass shooting, and Ukraine has repeatedly denied any link with Friday's attack. Both the US and France say they have intelligence pointing to the extremist group's responsibility, while the US warned Moscow an attack was imminent just days before the mass shooting. Meanwhile, Putin described the ongoing investigation.
Investigators are carefully establishing the circumstances of this barbaric crime, finding out its details, determining the role and degree of guilt of each participant, and studying the conclusions of criminologists and experts.
An eighth suspect was remanded in pre-trial custody on Tuesday, accused of providing accommodation for the attackers.
Following the Moscow shootings, France has raised its terror alert warning back to the highest level. The nation has fallen victim to several terror attacks in recent years, and security is of a particular concern in the build-up to this summer's Paris Olympics. With this in mind, the security services have been carrying out drills to prepare for a worst-case scenario.
French police and intelligence services are ensuring that they are ready for the prospect of a terrorist attack. In a practice drill, a group of armed forces enter a 19th century chateau where police students are play-acting to depict a real-life scenario.
So here we're part of a training course for mass killings, and we're able to play out the entire scenario, from the start of the attack to the complete neutralization of the 4 hostage takers, with the hostages being freed and the injured being taken care of.
The simulation comes at a sensitive time in France. The security alert is raised to its highest level following Friday's attack on Moscow's Crocus Concert Hall. And with the Paris Olympic Games just around the corner, hundreds of members of the elite unit are preparing to be mobilised every day to protect civilians if terrorists target the events. But with or without the Olympics, this is core business for the raid team. They have been conducting these exercises since the 2015 Paris terrorist attacks, in which armed assailants killed 130 people when they targeted 6 locations across the city. This specific rehearsal was designed to make sure different response units work together.
It's how everything fits together that interests us, and how to integrate all the emergency action, because initially it's the police who arrive first, then the fire brigade, and then it can be reversed.
On Monday, Prime Minister Gabriel Attal announced that 4,000 additional military personnel had been placed on high alert and that France had already foiled 2 attacks in 2024.
Stay tuned to France 24.
Welcome to Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for staying with us. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a Darfur breakaway faction vows to fight alongside the army against the RSF paramilitary force on the other side of Sudan's devastating conflict. The military reiterates
Yo! What the?
On this Tuesday night, Baltimore's deadly disaster.
The bridge is gone.
A major bridge comes crashing down. The massive ship that struck it. How could the entire structure collapse? And the search for victims. Our Joel Senek is at the scene. Marineland loses 2 more beluga whales. The growing calls to shut down the facility.
Enough is enough.
Plus, you can't have cold feet applying for this cool job.
We had 875 applications this year.
The help wanted at Antarctica's Penguin Post Office.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. We begin with breaking news about that disastrous bridge collapse in Baltimore. 6 people are now presumed dead after a cargo ship struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge, causing it to crumble into the river below. Cameras captured the moment it happened just before 1:30 a.m. local time. The ship hit a support column, quickly triggering the collapse, sending large sections of the bridge into the water. And here is what it looks like now. The bridge snapped in several places, submerged in the water. 2 people were rescued, 1 is in serious condition. The 6 men who are presumed dead are believed to have been part of a construction crew that was repairing potholes on the bridge when it collapsed. First responders believe several vehicles may have fallen into the water. Maryland's governor has declared a state of emergency. Global's Joel Senek joins us from near the scene. Joel, what's the latest?
Carolyn, the U.S. Coast Guard now confirms that the search and rescue mission is transitioning to a recovery operation. But officials stress they're not going anywhere. All of the air, land, and sea resources are still being deployed so the operation can be carried out to its fullest.
The entire bridge, the entire Key Bridge in the harbor.
A desperate call in Tuesday's early morning hours, leading to a scene described as something out of a movie. A large cargo ship appears to have lost power before ramming into a major bridge in Baltimore, Maryland, sending vehicles and people into the frigid river below.
This is a unthinkable tragedy. We have to, first and foremost, pray for all of those who are impacted.
Search and rescue crews combed the water throughout Tuesday. Officials say a pothole repair crew was on the bridge at the time of the collision. This man says he knew the construction workers and is praying for good news. Authorities stress the aftermath could have been a lot worse. The ship's crew sent out a mayday call, and the bridge was shut down moments before the collision.
I'm thankful for the folks who literally, by being able to stop cars from coming over the bridge, these people are heroes. They saved lives. They saved lives last night.
President Joe Biden also responding to the catastrophic collapse, saying everything points to it being an accident. He's pledging help both now and in the months ahead.
It's my intention that the federal government will pay for the entire cost of reconstructing that bridge, and I expect the Congress to support my effort. We're with you. We're going to stay with you as long as it takes.
But for tonight, the focus remains on the recovery effort. The Coast Guard says just based off how long it's been since the collapse, how extensive their search has been as well, and the water temperature, it all leads them to believe that any of the missing construction workers, they will not be found alive. But Maryland's governor earlier today committed to keep searching, saying it's a pledge he's made to their families. Carolyn?
Now, Joel, this bridge will be out for a long time. What impact will this have?
Of course, a lot of impact to those who live in this area. It's a large bridge. It's a major roadway. It actually leads to a main airport in this region, but also it is a major port when it comes to the U.S. economy. This is, as the president noted earlier today, the largest import and export point for cars and trucks in the U.S. Thousands of jobs depend on this port, and it's one reason, one of many, he says, they will work hard to reconstruct this bridge and get this port operational again as soon as possible. Carolyn?
Joel Senek near Baltimore. Thanks, Joel. About 30,000 vehicles cross the Key Bridge every day. The Port of Baltimore has also suspended vessel traffic until further notice. So for a transportation hub that is so busy and so important, how could this have happened? Eric Sorensen has that part of the story.
The first question, what went wrong with the container ship, the Dolly? Lights were seen flickering, and investigators know if the electricity failed, there was no steering it.
When you lose electrical power, you're going to lose the hydraulics. Of course, the rudder is hydraulically powered.
But why would a collision take down the entire structure? In simple terms, a big ship and an old bridge.
The support is a very relatively flimsy structure. When you look at it, it's a kind of trestle structure with individual legs. So the bridge has collapsed simply as a result of this very large impact.
Once the Dolly veered off course, the bridge support was no match for the tonnage and energy of a ship that size, and the truss bridge itself, one piece connected to the next, created a chain reaction collapse. Construction of the bridge began in 1972. The newest container ships back then, like the Hamburg Express, were smaller, less than 1/3 the container capacity of the Dolly built 10 years ago. And ships are only getting bigger, and old structures like this bridge are almost defenseless.
Its strength is also its weakness in certain locations where the designers have perhaps looked at ship collision, but not a ship of this size.
In other words, says the Transportation Secretary,
I do not know of a bridge that has been constructed to withstand a direct impact from a vessel of this size.
there are older bridges all over the world, including Canada. One expert says they can't be made collision-proof, but should have warning systems to alert and stop automobile traffic when minutes can make a difference.
A warning system should be in place, regardless. The sensor would see a boat approaching more than the allowable distance, immediately to sound off the alarm, a loud alarm, so people can actually avoid immediately.
But the investigation will start with the container ship.
Information on vessel operations, safety history, safety record. They'll look at the owner, they'll look at the operator, and they'll look at the operations this day.
Investigators did not board the ship early Tuesday to allow all efforts to focus initially on search and recovery. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
In Saskatchewan, 4 people have been found dead inside a rural home east of Regina, and investigators say they are treating the deaths as suspicious. RCMP discovered the 4 deceased adults last night in a home near the village of Neudorf. Global's Musa Imran is following the story outside Neudorf tonight. Musa.
Carolyn, it's a cold day here near Neudorf, Saskatchewan, and this small community is dealing with some even more bone-chilling news as 4 family members were found dead on this property behind me. Here's what we know. On Sunday, shortly after 6 p.m., RCMP conducted a wellness check and found the bodies. The bodies are of 2 adults and 2 of their adult children. The deaths are being considered suspicious, but RCMP say there's no imminent threat to the public. Neudorf is a small village about an hour and a half east of Regina, and the population here is only a few hundred people. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the community has been fairly tight-lipped about the situation. Neither the mayor nor town councilors were available to speak to us, and any residents who didn't have much to share. The next of kin have been notified, but the names of the family members have not been released. The bodies of the deceased have been sent to Regina for autopsies to be conducted later this week, as the cause of death is still in question. Carolyn, back to you.
Musa Imran outside Neudorf, Saskatchewan. Thanks. There are renewed calls for accountability at Ontario's Marineland after news of 2 more beluga whale deaths at the embattled theme park. Officials say they passed away earlier this month, bringing the total whale fatalities at the park to 17 since 2019. Critics are now calling for the doors to be shut at the Niagara Falls facility, with dozens of whales still in their possession. Jeff Semple reports.
They come from a land of ice and snow. Now belugas have a home in Arctico.
This commercial from 2004 proudly promoted Marineland's beluga whales. The Niagara Falls theme park was once home to more than 50 of the highly intelligent and social mammals, but over the past few years, that number has dropped dramatically.
It's heartbreaking.
This former marine mammal trainer worked at Marineland for over a decade until 2012, when he quit and sounded the alarm.
Their life support system is unable to maintain the health of the animals.
2 more beluga whales at Marineland have now died, bringing the total number of whale deaths over the past 4 years to at least 17.
Enough is enough. It's time to shut this place down, and we're asking the Ontario government to step in before more animals suffer and die.
Ontario's Animal Welfare Services has been investigating the tourist attraction since 2020, and Marineland says it receives weekly visits from provincial inspectors. In a written statement, the park says the 2 whales died from a stomach torsion on which it is not possible to operate. We have a number of elderly whales who are cared for with great compassion, it says. The reality is that all animals eventually die from one cause or another, whether in the wild or captivity.
It's unconscionable, really.
This marine mammal scientist has visited and inspected the facility several times, most recently around 2018.
Those belugas were like goldfish in a bag. I mean, there were so many of them.
Belugas don't fare well in captivity. In the wild, their average life expectancy is around 35 years, but they can live into their 70s. The belugas dying at Marineland, she says, are far too young.
It is clearly due to the conditions at the park. There is no other explanation for this mortality rate.
Marineland is the last facility in Canada with belugas in captivity. The Vancouver Aquarium closed its display back in 2016 after 5 whales died in the span of just 15 months, sparking protests and a fierce debate over animal rights. At Marineland, approximately 35 beluga whales remain, and despite earlier reports to the contrary, Marineland says it plans to reopen for the summer season.
Everyone loves Marineland.
Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Nearly 400 police officers in Montreal carried out simultaneous raids over suspected cocaine trafficking, money laundering, and illegal gambling today. The RCMP served 20 search warrants at 16 homes and 4 businesses, most of them bars. At least 13 people have been arrested in connection with an alleged criminal organization. Montreal Police, the Canada Revenue Agency, and officers from outside the province are also involved.
We've enlisted the help of the British Columbia, Ontario, and New Brunswick RCMP Emergency Response Team. So they were here this morning to assist our Quebec RCMP Emergency Response Team.
It's unclear which criminal organization is being targeted, but the RCMP says it is known to the force. Officers are not ruling out more raids and arrests. Ontario's spending spree coming up. What's in the province's most expensive budget ever? The Ontario government has tabled the most expensive budget in the province's history. The $214 billion spending package includes investments in primary care and a first-of-its-kind medical school.
A big chunk of this money is going to supporting the wages and recruiting and retaining more healthcare workers so they can take care of people where they want to be taken care of.
But it also comes with a deeper-than-expected deficit. Colin DeMello has been poring over all the details and joins us now. Colin, what stands out to you?
Yeah, well, the finance minister was signaling, Carolyn, that 2024 is going to be a difficult economic climate here in Ontario. He said higher interest rates, higher inflation, and a larger population as well has put a lot of pressure on Queen's Park, which meant that while they weren't able to balance the budget, this budget was all about balancing a lot of priorities, and the government seemed unwilling to cut any funding. Here are some of the big items that came out of the 2024 budget. On affordability, the major item was the cut to the gasoline tax. The Ford government shaved off 5.7 cents per liter back in 2022. They are extending that cut until December of 2024. The government says this is primarily a response to the federal price on carbon, which has increased, as you know, the price on the cost of gasoline in Ontario. On healthcare, the Ford government is spending billions of dollars on healthcare to the tune of about $3 billion or so, from home care to primary care. Some of that money will go to help people find family doctors, retention of nurses, training of nurses as well, and some money is being set aside as well for York University to investigate the construction of a new medical college to focus solely on family medicine. Also, $2 billion of that funding is going to home care to hire more people to work with patients who want to stay at home as long as they can. There also are some weird other nuggets. For example, campsites in Ontario are going to be electrified, so you can get away from the big city, but you can still have those comforts of home with you there. As well, the Ford government is spending about $100 million on auto theft crimes, to battle auto theft vehicles that are happening here across Ontario, and to buy 4 new helicopters so that police can chase those bad guys from the sky. The finance minister says that this was a budget for the moment, really one that they didn't want to tighten the belt at a time when most Ontarians likely wouldn't be able to afford it. Carolyn.
Thanks, Colin. Colin DeMello in Toronto. And there is money in this budget for training child welfare workers and to address youth trafficking in Northern Ontario. More for us to dig into in the days ahead. Still ahead, why abortion pill access is at the center of a U.S. Supreme Court hearing. Hundreds of protesters rallied outside the U.S. Supreme Court today as it weighs whether to restrict access to an abortion pill. Mifepristone was first approved in the U.S. more than 2 decades ago. It's now used in close to 60% of all abortions there. The court will decide whether a group of anti-abortion doctors could force the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to roll back access to it. Analysts say the Supreme Court appears likely to reject the challenge, with a number of justices indicating the lawsuit should be dismissed. Shares in Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media company, skyrocketed during its stock market debut today. Trading under the new ticker DJT, the stock jumped by more than 50% only minutes after its launch, triggering a brief trading halt this morning. After soaring to nearly $80 a share, stock prices ended the day significantly lower, under $58. That still gives the newly merged company, which the former U.S. president owns roughly 60% of, a nearly $8 billion valuation. Julian Assange has won a partial victory in his U.S. extradition case. 2 British High Court judges have ruled the WikiLeaks founder cannot be extradited on espionage charges until the U.S. guarantees he won't get the death penalty. Assange is locked in a decade-long legal battle over the site's publication of hundreds of thousands of confidential U.S. documents, one of the largest thefts of classified government information in American history. The delay allows Assange more time to fight a transfer to the U.S. to face charges. The U.S. must give assurances within 3 weeks, or a full appeal hearing will be granted. Assange has been in a maximum security prison in London for 5 years. The U.S. is urging Israel to abandon plans for a major ground offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, while working to curtail a spiraling crisis in the region.
Gaza is suffering a humanitarian catastrophe, and the situation is getting even worse.
The message came from the U.S. Defense Secretary during a meeting with Israel's defense minister at the Pentagon. The U.S. also reportedly outlined an alternative approach on a possible Rafah offensive, which is said to be focused on precision targeting and civilian evacuations. Next, do you have what it takes to work at Antarctica's Penguin Post Office? There are jobs not for the faint of heart, and then there's this. A position on a tiny island in Antarctica, surrounded by thousands of penguins, tourists, and postcards. It's affectionately known as the Penguin Post, the most remote post office in the world. It's located in Port Lockroy, more than 1,000 kilometers south of the tip of Argentina and Chile. It's no easy gig, but for many, it's the job of a lifetime. Mike Torley explains.
As port of calls go, Port Lockroy is as far from tropical as you get. Yet for 5 months of the year, tourists flock to this icy rock on the edge of the world to mail postcards.
Excuse me, post office open. Oh, good.
Where to begin? Well, in the 1940s, a number of countries were looking to exert sovereignty over the Antarctic. As part of its territorial claim, the UK built a post office. And now every year, the trust overseeing operations has to hire staff. And it's not hard.
We had 875 applications this year.
The jobs aren't for the faint of heart. There's no running water, so no toilets or showers, near constant daylight and freezing temperatures. It's just 5 Brits living 14,000 kilometers from the UK on an island that's less than a square kilometer in size.
It's a football field, basically. Yeah. It's tiny. It's tiny. And you're sharing it with, well, this year, it's about 1,500, 1,600 penguins. So, you're the guest, do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the penguins. One of the jobs on the island is counting the colony for scientific research. And eventually they say you'll learn to tune out the constant hollering and guano issues.
It pongs. It is pretty stinky. You do get used to it, though.
And then there's the mail. For roughly $3, tourists can send a postcard, which the staff have to process individually. And Antarctic tourists send a lot.
Yeah, about 80,000. So, we have to be careful with repetitive strain injury, tell you.
So it's a lot of work for mediocre pay. Yet those who have done the job in the past often try to sign up again.
I'm not quite sure I'm going to go back to living in London and having a tube and so many people around me.
And that can't be easy. Not after living amongst the glaciers and wildlife on the edge of the world. Mike Torley, Global News Toronto.
And that is Global National. For this Tuesday, I'm Carolyn Jarvis. Tonight's Your Canada is the Rocky Mountains near Wardner, British Columbia. We love to see your Canada. Please email your pictures to viewers at globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna will be back tomorrow. Have a great night.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.